Welcome back to the channel. It's ItsGheb here. It's Zelda time. We're talking about Wind Waker today, and you know, I don't think there's another Zelda game that gets the same type of attention that the Wind Waker does. So what do I mean by that? Well, have you ever noticed that the people that like Wind Waker really like Wind Waker? Like, think about it. How many times have you heard people say that they really like the sailing in this game? Or how often have you heard people say that this game has their favorite versions of either Link or Ganondorf? Or honestly, take a shot for every single time you've heard someone say that the art style aged like a fine wine, and double that shot if they also said it looks better now than Twilight Princess does. And you know, Wind Waker was actually one of the first games that I remember hearing discourse on, and nowadays you just really can't turn that noise off. But back then, you never really heard people get too up in arms over a video game that often, and we really have the Space World Expo of 2000 to thank for that. But back when the GameCube was announced at this event, one of the things briefly showed off was a snippet of a battle between Link and Ganondorf that looked like a far graphically superior version to what we had in Ocarina of Time. Aonuma and the rest of the Zelda team hated that clip because of how derivative it seemed to what they'd already done with Ocarina of Time, which was probably something that pushed the team into the more cartoony, cel-shaded art style that we're familiar with today. And when they eventually did show Wind Waker off, man, what a divisive response. There were a lot of people who were just not interested in seeing a Zelda game in this art style, thinking that Nintendo was steering more towards a kid-centric audience, which Nintendo has always kind of had that stigma around them when compared to what Sega was putting out on the Genesis, or what Sony was doing with the PlayStation 1, but Zelda was like Nintendo's biggest title that most appealed towards teenagers and young adults at the time, unless you're counting something like Metroid. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask both had some pretty dark aspects, and were pretty realistic looking games by N64 standards, so seeing a Zelda game with this radical of an artistic shift definitely threw some people for a loop, especially after having their expectations set a certain way with that Space World trailer. One has to imagine that this response probably played a hand in how this game ultimately performed. Now, Wind Waker was no flop by any means, as it sold over 4.4 million copies, making it the fourth highest selling GameCube game of all time. However, Nintendo weren't exactly satisfied with those numbers, given that Ocarina of Time had sold over 7.6 million copies years ago, so these were still some disappointing metrics in their eyes. Critically, the game fared much better, earning a score in the mid-90s on Metacritic, but even with the positive buzz from critics, it still wasn't enough to have this game meet Nintendo's financial marks. And for a long time, this was the most divisive Zelda game to ever be released, until it wasn't. You know, it's hard to really pinpoint exactly when this game started getting the universal praise that it did, but I want to say it was probably a little after Skyward Sword came out that people really started appreciating Wind Waker as a collective. Which, yeah, that makes sense, because Skyward Sword, for as much as I like that game, is a way more divisive title, so it probably put things in perspective for most Zelda fans. I also think by that point, Wind Waker was almost 10 years old, and it still looked like it could have been a modern-day Wii title, so people were starting to appreciate how well the art style held up. Wind Waker is kind of like the Pinkerton of Zelda games. When it was released, there was not a whole lot of people that could agree about it, but nowadays, it's almost universally agreed upon to be one of the best. This is even further punctuated that when a few years later, when Nintendo released the HD version for the Wii U, it not only looked better than ever, but was debatably one of the most graphically beautiful games on the entire console. I never got around to playing this version of the game until this video, but I remember the reception of this one being incredibly positive. Hell, it was the 9th best-selling game for the Wii U, which I mean, it's the Wii U, so that's not really saying much, but for a remaster of a GameCube game, there was clearly something going on here. Now, my first experience with Wind Waker was actually the demo on the Zelda Anniversary Collection all the way back on the GameCube. From what I can remember, you could do a few things in this demo, like the Forsaken Fortress stealth section, or walk around Dragon Roost Island, and even play through a bit of the first dungeon. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to sink my teeth into and hold my interest. I never actually ended up owning Wind Waker, and my first time playing the game through in full was because one year for my birthday, my parents gave me a GameFly subscription of all things. I played it probably around 2005 or 2006, enjoyed it, but I didn't think it was on the same level as Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and the newly released Twilight Princess was a little bit more up my alley. There was a lot about the game that I really liked, but there were some pain points with Wind Waker that I'm sure most people were familiar with, such as the difficulty being too easy, the dungeons being pretty straightforward, the sailing being a little boring, and of course, that fucking Triforce hunt. So those things kept me from enjoying the game as much as I did the other 3D Zeldas, and since my initial playthrough, I haven't really come back to this game since. Until today, because for this video, I played through the HD version released on the Wii U back in 2015, and let me just say, this is the default way to play the game now. Like, it fixed so many of the issues that I had with Wind Waker back in the day. The sailing had been streamlined, there's a ton of new QOL features to speed up the gameplay, and the Triforce Hunt went from being one of the most unfun, grindy things in a Zelda game to being something that can easily be done in about a third of the time. And what's even better is that this version of the game really highlighted the things I already loved. Wind Waker is a good-ass looking video game with some great music that has some incredibly funny writing. It offers a very unique take on Hyrule unlike any other Zelda game, has some of the strongest characters the series has ever seen, and of course, there were a ton of gameplay enhancements from the N64 games to sink my teeth into. Plus, this game is low-key kind of a pirate game, and what's not to love about that? For this video, I'll keep most of the discussion to what you will find across both versions of the game, with a special section at the end of the video where I cover everything that the Wii U version brought to the table. This playthrough really elevated the Wind Waker in my eyes to being a Zelda that I thought was kind of somewhere in the middle of the pack to one of my overall favorites in the entire franchise. But what was it about this game that helped me reach that conclusion? Well, let's see. We've got a lot to discuss today, so without further ado, this is my review for The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. How about the first thing we talk about is the thing that everybody bitched about when this game was first revealed: the visuals. So here's a take that you've probably never heard before. The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker game looks good. Yeah, this will come as a surprise to exactly 0% of you, but the thing that got panned the most with Wind Waker's reveal is now the thing that most people bring up as one of its strongest points. Let's get a little bit more in depth here and talk about some of the things that I think work out really well. Most notably, we have the cel-shaded art style that does a lot of the heavy lifting here. One thing I thought was interesting is how that despite being a cel-shaded game, Wind Waker doesn't have the typical outlines that you'd regularly associate with the style, as opposed to something like Borderlands, for example. Wind Waker in many ways still feels like a playable cartoon given how bright the color palette is, and in even some of the more dark areas how characters such as Link are able to stand out. Let's focus on the character design while we're talking about things that are standing out. I think everyone in this game looks great. Most of the shorter characters you can tell have a pretty similar base for their model, such as having a circular head, smaller arms, and more cylindrical bodies, but that creates this strong sense of cohesion with them that I like. And then you look at some of the taller characters and you've got the same sort of design philosophy, with a lot of characters having a similar model to Gonzo. This makes characters that have a bit more of a unique model stand out even more, such as Beetle, the King of Hyrule, and of course Ganondorf. This art style also transitions to the enemies, and we see plenty of things get a makeover, such as the dog versions of Dark Nuts, Wizrobes that look like if Toucan Sam made a D&D character, and my personal favorite, the Redeads who went to Claire's. I think the thing I like most is how animated all of these enemies are. Admittedly, in the N64 games, enemies didn't really do too much animation-wise outside of attacking or dying, but now they can actually do some situational things that add to how expressive they can be. Sometimes enemies will drop their weapons and freak out if they don't have them. Sometimes you'll see them fall off the edge and hold on for their life. And you can even squash them with a hammer like they're Wile E. fucking Coyote. Getting back to the main characters, they're incredibly well animated too. They aren't as cartoonishly batshit as the enemies, except for Ganondorf during this scene. I have no idea how he's doing that with his mouth. But they're way more expressive than any Zelda game before, and honestly most after this one too. Look at Link, for example. I fucking love this guy. They gave him these cat-like eyes that just amped up everything he does. From the freak out he has when his sister is stolen, to the absolute insane altitude he gets from jumping up when he's being burned by lava, to getting dizzy while doing the hurricane spin attack. And just look at this guy's face when Ganondorf is monologuing. They made Link into a complete dork, and I am so here for it. This is the most likable Link that we've ever seen, no contest. The rest of the cast doesn't get as much time in the sun, but Tetra and the King of Red Lions are some notable standouts. Like, how'd they find a way to make a boat that can only move his head so interesting to look at? On the environment side of things, I think there's a lot of good stuff going on here too. Now, for a lot of the time, you are going to be in open water where the only things you'll be seeing are the oceans around you and the islands out in the distance. Which, given that you're on a flat ocean, you're not going to see every island available, but as you get closer, you'll see silhouettes out in the distance before they become fully rendered. It's a bit of a stylistic compromise that I think works in an artistic sense. There are some structures in the water, such as towers, that do kind of just fade in and out of existence that are a bit more jarring by comparison though. Outside of that, I think the environments look great. My favorite areas are honestly the obvious picks: Forest Haven, Windfall Isle, Dragon Roost Island, Forsaken Fortress. Really any of those ones that have that instantly identifiable silhouette when you stare out over the horizon. And I think one of the most subtle yet defining things that Wind Waker has when it comes to its art style has to relate to its particle effects. The explosions of the bombs, the death effects of enemies and bosses, even just the drawn-in style of wind gusts really makes the world of Wind Waker so much more vibrant. And yeah, I could go on, but to the surprise of no one, the visuals of Wind Waker are great. What more really needs to be said? What's also an unsurprising truth is how good this game sounds, because it's one of the best in the series if you ask me. Pretty much every sound effect has been given this amped up feel to make it seem so over the top that you just want to keep hearing them. Like getting the classical Zelda fanfare into the rupee collection noise whenever you fish up some buried treasure has never sounded as sweet as it does here, which is good because you'll be hearing this a lot. I think my favorite example of this has to be during combat. So Link almost has this combo system now that when he hits multiple attacks, he gets some sound effects that gradually increase in pitch before he hits a finisher. This is one of the most satisfying things in the game to constantly pull off. I try to do this as much as possible. The voice work is also pretty good at giving the character some extra personality. Obviously, we're still a ways away from having these games be fully voiced, but that little extra bit of expression is good. We even have some characters having some minor speech, such as Link saying "come on" during certain dungeons. But now I want to shift gears and talk about the soundtrack, because in my eyes, a Zelda game's audio is defined by its OST, and Wind Waker is one of my favorites. As opposed to some of the more dark and ominous pieces that we saw in Majora's Mask, Wind Waker's music is bouncy and has a greater focus on strings, woodwind, and even some brass instruments. There's a good amount of tunes here though. My personal favorites have to be Dragon Roost Island for being a complete bop, Mulgara's theme because and of course the Great Sea because of the overwhelming sense of adventure it brings as you sail across the ocean. I think it also shows up pretty strong at nighttime too, given that the waters are dead silent, which makes for a total vibe change into something far more relaxing. So yeah, audio is another big plus for me, making Wind Waker potentially one of the overall best games in the series when it comes to the presentation side of things. Now, normally I lump in talking about the setting with the story at large because I kind of think that you can't really talk about one without having the other, but I've got a lot to say about both of these things, so I just thought it would be better if we get into the setting and backstory first. This game takes place hundreds of years after the events of Ocarina of Time. Ganondorf has broken from his imprisonment inside of the Sacred Realm and began seizing Hyrule for himself once again. The people of Hyrule prayed that the Hero of Time would return, but he never came. In a final desperation attempt, there was another prayer sent to the goddess who pretty much went Noah's Ark on Hyrule by telling people to flee to the mountaintops as they flooded the land into a massive ocean. A pocket of air around the majority of Hyrule was created, with the Master Sword acting as a key to keep Ganondorf, his minions, and the rest of Hyrule inside of a suspended state of time. Over the years, the legend of Hyrule faded, and the people who were once called Hylians began forming their own culture. So yeah, that's pretty much our lore dump for this game, and we have a brand new version of Hyrule to adventure through. So what does that look like? I think the most obvious thing that everyone realizes is that this is a seafaring Zelda game, so there are plenty of elements from pirate media that you're probably familiar with. Crossing vast oceans, finding sunken treasure, boarding other ships, going to uncharted islands. It's a very unique take on the Zelda formula that up to this point primarily stuck to your typical high fantasy approach. Now what might not be as apparent is that this is a post-apocalyptic Hyrule that we are playing through, which I guess you could technically say the first Zelda game was also post-apocalyptic, but since we never had an idea of what Hyrule was like before Ganon's reign, it's fair to say that Wind Waker is the first game where we actually feel the wake of what happened. And yeah, we've had some recent games such as Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom that do the whole post-apocalyptic thing too, but there's also some differences there. Those games are only 100 years after the apocalypse, so when you're playing through them, you're very much in the reclaiming and rebuilding phase of things. Wind Waker is so far removed from the events of its world origin that it's not only started several of its own traditions, but the old world itself has more or less been forgotten by everyone in the game except for the oldest of Guardians. To go along with that, Not only has there been an apocalypse, but the nature of this apocalypse has caused many of the people of these islands to be cut off from one another for an incredibly long time. And sure, while water traversal technology, or in the Rito or Korok's case, flight has been something that's emerged eventually, it still took a very long time for them to get to that point, so these islands really did end up developing on their own over the course of decades. Speaking of the Rito and the Koroks, let's get into those two because those are the new races that we have this time around. The Rito are a race of bird-like people who primarily live on Dragon Roost Island, and I think they are an extremely great addition to the lineup of fantasy races here. They have a tradition where they need to receive a scale from Valu in order to earn their wings, they operate the postage system given their flight abilities, and most interestingly, they actually evolved from the old Zora race, which I always thought was kind of weird because you'd assume if any race would thrive in a new world that was mostly aquatic, it would be the Zoras. But I guess since the water is unnatural, it was just not hospitable for them, so they grew wings and turned into birds instead. Sure, whatever. The other race is the Koroks, which for all intents and purposes have replaced the Deku Scrubs as the plant people of the Zelda universe. I'm a bit bitter about that because of my Majora's Mask bias, but the Koroks are pretty cool in their own right. They occupy the Forest Haven, which is essentially the Great Deku Tree's response to keeping the forest safe during the flood. They attempt to grow the forest by planting trees on neighboring islands, and I said earlier that they replaced Deku Scrubs, but maybe it's more accurate to say that they replaced the Kokiri, since much like the Zora to the Rito, they evolved from them. We do see the Gorons return too, in the form of random merchants, which I honestly have no idea how they managed to survive the flood for this long, but they don't really play that big of a role in the story. No, most of our central characters are either Hylians, Ancient Guardians, Gerudo, or Enchanted Wood. But if we're going to be talking about our main characters, we should probably get into the story proper, so let's do that first. The final thing I'll say on the setting is, this is one of my favorite renditions of Hyrule that we've ever seen. Not just because it's unique, not just because it's never been done before, but because it's still unmistakably Zelda. And for them to go in a new direction like this and still have everything feel so familiar is just really well done. You know, before replaying this game, I have to admit, I kind of already had my opinions on the graphics and audio going in, and I was already sure I was going to enjoy them. The story, on the other hand, was something that really surprised me because I didn't really think much of it when I played it way back in the day, but now, I would probably consider it one of my favorites. We once again take control of a new Link, who much like other versions of Hyrule's chosen hero, is a young Link that has a rather humble upbringing. He lives on Outset Islands with his sister, his grandma, and a bunch of other villagers until one day he notices a giant bird carrying a girl overhead. The bird is being pursued by a pirate ship who managed to land a hit on the bird, knocking the girl free of its grasp. Link goes to investigate the forest where the girl fell and saves her from a few monsters he finds there. We learn that the girl's name is Tetra, and she's the leader of the pirates. As they leave the forest, the giant bird swoops back down and steals Link's sister instead. This has Link join up with the pirates and leave his home island in hopes of saving his sister. We get taken to this old fortress, and we eventually find our sister in a jail cell, but that bird comes back one more time and takes us to a man dressed in black who has us tossed out to sea. We wake up separated from both our sister and the pirates, and we are on the back of a sentient sailboat called the King of Red Lions. He tells us the man that we encountered is none other than Ganondorf, and that we need to find the power that was once held by the Hero of Time by reclaiming the Goddess Pearls. And yep, it's Collectathon time as you get the Din's Pearl from the new bird-like race of people called the Rito, Ferori's Pearl from the new tree-like race of people called the Koroks long before you monsters started crucifying them in Tears of the Kingdom, and we find Neru's Pearl from the giant fish called Lord Jaboon. After receiving the pearls, a colossal tower emerges from the Great Sea, which Link ends up climbing up as a final test of sorts, and then he gets sent down beneath the ocean into a massive castle. This is where he finds the Master Sword, and then he prepares to take the fight to Ganondorf. We head back to the fortress, meet up with Tetra and the pirates again, who agree to take the imprisoned girls back to safety, and Link and Tetra go to confront Ganondorf. When they do, Ganondorf basically no-diffs them, and lets Link know that not only has the Master Sword lost its power, but was also acting as a shield for Ganondorf, and when Link removed it from Hyrule, he regained all of his strength. Furthermore, Ganondorf recognizes Tetra's necklace, and realizes that she is an incarnation of Princess Zelda, which is what he was having the birds search for all this time. Some members of the Rito clan come by and make the save for Link and Tetra, before the dragon Valu shows Ganondorf how he could lower his heating bill. The King of Red Lions takes Link and Tetra back down to the castle where he reveals a bunch of information. the land under the sea is Hyrule, that it was flooded to keep Ganon at bay, and that the King of Red Lions was actually the former King of Hyrule, Daphnis no Hansen Hyrule, and that Tetra was an heir to him as an incarnation of Zelda who holds the Triforce of Wisdom. The three agree to put a stop to Ganon, with Zelda remaining behind in the castle, while Link and the King restore power to the Master Sword and reclaim all pieces of the lost Triforce of Courage. The two also need to find the two lost stages in order to perform a restoration ritual on the Master Sword, but they find that Ganondorf's forces had killed them off. This means that two new stages need to be selected, with Medli from the Rito tribe and Makar from the Koroks being the prime candidates. With their help, we restore power to the Master Sword, find the 8 pieces of the Triforce of Courage, and are now recognized as the chosen hero. One last thing to do is take the fight to Ganondorf once again. Link and the King return to Hyrule to find that Ganondorf has captured Zelda in the hopes of reuniting the Triforce to get his wish of ruling over the land. And while he does reassemble the Triforce, the King intercepts his wish and instead requests to have Hyrule be buried beneath the sea forever so that the world above can remain at peace. As the King's wish is granted, Ganondorf loses his mind and attempts to kill Zelda and Link, but one application of Master Sword to the forehead puts a stop to that pretty quick. Link and Zelda are swept away by the sea, Zelda is returned to her Tetra form, Hyrule once again fades from memory, and the game ends with Link joining the pirates as they set out for new adventures and lands to explore. And so ends the story of Wind Waker, and what can you say? There's a lot of stuff that happens in this game, especially compared with older Zelda titles. Most Zelda games seem to have a pretty standard structure of calling Link into action, gathering several plot MacGuffins by interacting with different areas of the world and solving their problems, maybe having a complication in the middle like getting the Master Sword or being sent to the Dark World or the future or something, and then another round of collectathon shenanigans before a final showdown with Ganon. And make no mistake about it, if you just wrote down a list of all the events of things that you do in Wind Waker, you more or less have a pretty similar list to something like Ocarina of Time or A Link to the Past. What I think this game does really well is the story is structured in such a way, and there's so much character and personality here, that it really distracts you from that list and just makes this adventure all its own. I don't think any part of the game illustrates this as well as the characters, so let's just run down our list real quick. Still doesn't say anything, but obviously he's blooming with personality this time around through his expressions. We got a little bit of that in Majora's Mask, but here it's on full display, but I already talked about that enough in the graphics section of this video, so I won't spend too much time on it here. One thing I will say I like about this version of Link is that he isn't the descendant of a previous Link, and instead earns the blessing of the goddesses through his actions. He's just some goofy kid at the beginning of the game, but because of his desire to help people, he eventually becomes a legend in his own right, and I think that makes for a much more compelling character than just being another chosen hero. Tetra was easily the best incarnation of Zelda that we had ever seen up until that point. Reason being, and get ready for this, she's got a personality. Oh yeah, shocking, I know. Zelda in pretty much every game before this was either a damsel that needed to be rescued, or she would sometimes do stuff, but she was about as interesting to talk to as some of the rocks that Link could pick up and destroy. In her Tetra form, she's confident, in control, and has this aura about her that even a look at some of her crewmates can send them into action. But she's also intelligent, a little cocky, but has a good heart underneath it all, despite her wannabe rough pirate exterior. I think she's great through the majority of the game. I'm kind of bummed when she turns into Zelda and she just kind of sits around at Hyrule waiting to be captured, which is probably one of the biggest things holding her back from being my favorite, but overall she's a massive step up from what we saw in every previous game. The King of Red Lions is our sidekick character this time around, and he's another one of my favorites. He's got this kind of old soul energy I really like to him, which I mean, given that he's the former King of Hyrule, that totally makes sense. And overall, that makes him the most important side character to the overall plot of a Zelda game that we had seen up to that point. Navi and Tattle were fine, with Tattle definitely being the better of the two since she actually had a personality, but they didn't really do too much plot-wise outside of their initial interactions with Link. The King of Red Lions at the end of the day is the one who actually put a stop to Ganondorf's plan, since he rescued Link, guided him to get the Goddess Pearls, revived the Master Sword, reclaimed the Triforce, and not only does he stop Ganondorf's wish from being granted, he also wishes for Link and Tetra to have their own lives and let Hyrule remain in the past, which I think does a really good job of bookending some of the stuff that we saw in Ocarina of Time, with Hyrule having a very rough history. Maybe starting over really is for the best, and I think it's cool that the King of Hyrule was the one to make that decision. Then there's Ganondorf, and oh man, this is my favorite rendition of him in the series. So get this. Unlike Zelda, who is a descendant of a previous Zelda, this is just the same guy from Ocarina of Time. That means not only was he just chilling in the Sacred Realm for an unknown amount of time, but when he broke out and had his plans foiled again, he once again sat powerless for hundreds of years. This has made the man incredibly patient, and now he works through his forces a lot more in order to accomplish his goals. His desires are the same as ever: take over Hyrule and rule it as its leader. But now we get to learn a little bit more about him. It seems like over the years, Ganondorf has matured, becoming much more calm, and has reflected on why he wanted to rule Hyrule in the first place. This was a guy who was the leader of the Gerudo, a group of people who lived in a harsh desert climate that looked over at the prosperity of a land like Hyrule and wished they could have that for themselves. This Ganondorf doesn't seem to be interested in senseless violence anymore. He even tells Link that he has no desire to kill him because he just wants the pieces of the Triforce that they both carry. Of course, after the king steals his wish, he basically goes insane and tries to kill Link and Zelda like the good old days. But this is a way more nuanced version of the character than what we saw in Ocarina of Time, and I think it's just really well done here. So yeah, main cast of characters. Incredibly well animated, a lot more depth than what we saw in earlier games. And you know, the side characters are pretty good here too. We of course got Link's family with his sister Errol and his grandma, and these two are just incredibly sweet. Especially his grandma. Man, this game definitely knows how to make you feel bad when you leave her by herself, and then you return to see that she's come down with a bad sickness. You better do the side quest to help her get better, I swear to God. Then there are the pirates. And these guys are just a bunch of bumbling oafs, but they all have their own personalities, and I think they're a fun group to be around. You've got the sages Medli and Makar, who do their jobs pretty well, with Medli probably being the more interesting of the two. You've got the three guardians of the land being Valu, Jabun, and the Great Deku Tree, who speak in Old Hylian that if you do a second playthrough of the game, you can actually understand. There's also all the people of Outset and Windfall Island, that all have their own stuff going on, with easily my favorite being Salvatore, who is French as fuck, and while he can't be bothered to give a shit when no one's around, as soon as he has a customer, he goes all out with his minigame performance. We also see the debut of the fucking GOAT of the Zelda series, Beetle. He's just a shopkeeper, but the way that his expressions immediately resonate with people, he became a fan favorite overnight. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we have Tingle. So the last few games, Tingle was just this weirdo that everyone seemed to be embarrassed around. This time he's a fucking felon. Don't believe me? The very first time that you find this guy, he's in prison. After you rescue him, he isn't that important until the last third of the game when you have to do the Triforce hunt, which, yeah, we'll talk about that later. Tingle's role in this is to try to scam you out of as much money as possible in order to decipher all the charts of the Triforce pieces, and I am talking thousands of rupees. He is so crooked that not only is he taking advantage of you, but he's also made his brothers work for him by pushing this wheel on this island. Hell, this one isn't even actually related to him. This is just some guy that washed up on shore that Tingle put in his clothes and enslaved him into working for him. It's like the Legend of Zelda's version of Misery. Seriously, fuck this green bitch. Getting back on track. When it comes to the writing, this is where the series has really hit its stride when it comes to its humor in my eyes. You'll mainly see this in the form of characters such as Pirates or Salvatore, and I think it's some of the funniest and most charming writing that the series has seen to this day. They absolutely nailed it with the tone of this game. It most certainly is missing the darkness that Majora's Mask and parts of Ocarina of Time had, but it more than makes up for it for just how funny this game regularly is. I think you guys get the point now. This is one of my favorite stories in the series, easily a top 5 when it comes to this category. The writing is both funny and interesting, the characters are incredibly well done, and the game commits 100% to the tone that it's going for. Everything here just feels so unique from any other game in the series, but it still has that unmistakable Zelda charm. I wouldn't say it's perfect, maybe the Triforce hunt being the biggest pace breaker, especially in the original version, but I don't think that there has been another Zelda game that blooms with the same type of personality that this one has. Wind Waker's story is truly something special. Whew, that was a lot on the story. Let's get into the gameplay. So the first section of the gameplay portion of this video, I just wanted to talk about general improvements that we saw over the N64 games before we really get into the weeds of what makes the Wind Waker, well, the Wind Waker. Let's start with the basic control first. So I think one of the first things you'll notice right away is just how nimble this Link feels compared to the previous games. Link's ground speed, for example, feels maybe like a notch below when he was wearing the bunny hood in Majora's Mask, which to me is perfect. You won't really be doing a whole lot of traversal on foot, mind you, but I think it actually makes controlling Link feel a little bit less sluggish. This fluid feeling really transcends into the combat too, which really got a pretty decent bump in terms of the options available to the player at any given time. Now Link's main sword attacks are about the same as in 64 games between his slashes, spin attack, and jump attack, but now when you perform a combo, Link will have some swings that have him leap up into the air that makes his attacks feel far more impactful. There are some other flares to combat too, like being able to pick up enemy weapons, and this is mainly used for solving puzzles, but I do like how you can steal weapons from enemies that you knock over, so you can give them a bit of a taste of their own medicine. Link is also given access to a new counter ability. By pressing A during the right time of some attacks, Link will launch a counter attack that dodges the one coming towards him while dealing massive damage to the enemy. In theory anyways, this attack is pretty finicky, so it's not 100% something you can always rely on. A thing that I was actually surprised to see expanded upon was the stealth mechanics. This still isn't Metal Gear Solid by any means, but shit, it's starting to look like it a little bit with Link being able to hide in barrels to sneak past guards. You really have like one section of the game to worry about stealth, and it's not hard by any means, but I thought it was at least worth mentioning. Speaking of things not being hard, and maybe I'm jumping the gun when I say this a little bit, but there really isn't anything challenging in this game. During my playthrough, I had 0 deaths. In fact, I think the only time I dropped below half of my health was during my final encounter with Ganondorf, and I didn't even go out of my way to grab every heart piece or use items like the magic armor. Now, while this isn't the worst thing in the world since I'd rather play a game that's too easy instead of too hard, it is something to be noted that I think that the game swung a little too far into that direction. Unless you're new to Zelda games, and probably gaming in general, there won't be much here to actually put your skills to the test. Maybe a couple things to test your patience, but more on that in a bit. This isn't a very long game either. My playthrough was about 18 hours or so through the main story and doing a good amount of side content. Granted, I have played this game before, so I already had an idea of what I was supposed to be doing, but I think the average person could probably beat this comfortably in about 25 hours or so, assuming that it's their first playthrough. Going for extras or 100% completion would probably tack on an extra dozen or so hours given the sheer amount of stuff there is to do this time, but Wind Waker is a pretty quick ride if you just want to go through the story. The game does offer a second quest mode, which, I mean, fun fact, this is the first time that this has been done since Zelda 2. There's not that much to it. Link wears his lobster shirt throughout the game, the Hylian text spoken by the Guardians is readable, treasure chests are shuffled around on the sea, and you get to keep some items such as a deluxe pictograph box and any figurines. It wasn't enough to make me jump back in immediately, but, you know, there are some fun incentives if you want to do a second playthrough. But now, I think it's time that we dig a little bit more into what makes Wind Waker the game that it is. So let's get into world, dungeon, and quest design. First up is world, and I'll say, to this day, this is still one of the most unique open worlds that we've seen in the Zelda game. So how it works is that we're essentially on a 7x7 grid, meaning that there's 49 tiles, each with their own island for Link to explore. The Great Sea is massive. We of course don't have exact numbers to 100% scale it, but some people have estimated that the world of Wind Waker is pretty comparable to the size of Skyrim, which is pretty damn big from a game from 2002. That being said, it doesn't amount to that much since 95% of the playable area is just open sea, with the remaining amount of action taking place on the islands. Now, the limit to 1 island per tile is kind of disappointing, but at the very least, you do have a high number of locations to visit. Granted, most of them aren't necessary for the main story, and in fact, a large portion of them are pretty much one and done visits, but the winners here are really strong. Outset Island, Dragon Roost Island, Windfall Isle, with Windfall definitely being the best of the three, given the sheer amount of side content available there. Some of the side content is even dependent on things such as the time of day or even the phase of the moon, but we'll talk side content soon. So world design is overall good. I wish there was maybe like 5 or so more interesting islands that you'd visit more frequently, but what's here is pretty solid. On to the dungeons, and while I think the dungeon lineup in this game is overall good, I would say it's probably one of the weakest 3D Zelda games, definitely above Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, but not as good as the other 4. None of them are bad by any means. In fact, there are a couple of them that I think are really good. It's just that the best ones aren't as good as the best ones from other games, and we don't really have a lot of them this time around either. First, we have the Forsaken Fortress, which can actually be a little contentious on if it's a dungeon or not, but hey, you get an item after a mini-boss, you have a boss fight that gives you a heart container, and most importantly, the Zelda Wiki considers it one, so I do too. The first visit to this place is early on in the game for the mandatory stealth mission, but a little over halfway through, we come back here and can pretty much blitz through it. It's not really laid out like a traditional dungeon, meaning if you know the route, you can probably do it in like 10 to 20 minutes. It's still definitely a fun section of the game, and there are other dungeons I would say I like a little bit less, so it's overall a pretty decent one, probably just somewhere in the middle for me. The main boss is Helmarok King, which is a super satisfying encounter since you get to smash his beak in with a hammer. Next up is Dragon Roost Cavern, which for our first proper dungeon of the game, it's kind of cool that we have the fire trope instead of another forest one. I think the best section of this dungeon is when you get to go outside and see you're at the top of the mountain for a sense of scale, but other than that, it's a bit too straightforward. I like it enough, it's a good introductory dungeon, so I'd put it somewhere in the middle, maybe above like the average Zelda dungeon. The boss fight we have here is with Goma, and it's honestly a little bit more of a spectacle than a real challenge, but it's a good spectacle, so I like it. Next up is Forbidden Woods, which I kind of like about the same as Dragon Roost Cavern. Like aesthetically, this is a good looking dungeon, but it's not really too memorable outside of that. The boss Kalidimos is a bit better of an encounter than Goma, so again, I'd probably put this in the middle. So again, it's above average. Then we have the Tower of the Gods, which I think is the high point temple-wise of this game. You have the first area where you actually need to be on your boat to traverse, you have the section where you need to control these statues, and you have probably one of the best boss fights in the game, God Hand. Which yeah, Nintendo definitely was already overusing the whole 2 hands and a head trope for their bosses. This is still a pretty fun one though. After that, I'll just go over my second favorite dungeon too, which is the Earth Temple. This is basically the undead spooky temple of this game, featuring some pretty intricate light reflecting puzzles and allowing us to take control of Medley to reflect light and fly around. I'd probably rate this temple a bit higher if it wasn't for the honestly kind of lame boss. This is Jalhalla. He's
fat son of a bitch.
Yeah, let's go with that. This might be the easiest boss in any 3D Zelda game. It's kind of satisfying to kill all the mini-pos with the hurricane spin, but you can only kill a set amount before they all pile back together, which takes away the only thing I could really get behind with this fight, so I don't really care about it. Next up was the Wind Temple, which out of the main dungeons, this one I would say I like the least. The layout is a little all over the place, and this is also a dungeon where we control Makar, who can fly like Medley, but also plant seeds that Link can hookshot onto later. But I find that a little less interesting than what we saw in the Earth Temple. The boss fight is Mulgara, which is a pretty decent boss fight overall, if for any reason it's the Finally, there's Ganon's Tower, and much like the last 2 games, this is a series of challenges based on earlier dungeons, but now we get a boss rush too. Oh joy. Didn't care for this. The boss fight with Puppet Ganon also didn't really do it for me. Like, mechanically it's fine, I just think Puppet Ganon looks fucking stupid, so this one was a pass for me. The final fight with Ganondorf is some real shit though. Really awesome arena with the water pouring in, the fight provides a pretty decent challenge, and the moment where Zelda bounces a light arrow off of the mirror shield, fucking hype. Now the Zelda wiki also considers the Savage Labyrinth to be a dungeon, but they're wrong. It's just a gauntlet that you mainly have to go through to get some optional rewards, but it's also necessary for the Triforce Hunt. Which, speaking of the Triforce Hunt, let's talk about the structure of this game real quick, because I want to do that before we get into the side content. I'm not going to lie, Wind Waker really feels like a game that had a lot of ideas that got left on the cutting room floor. Like, the game starts off very strong up until you complete the Forbidden Woods. After that, you're supposed to get your 3rd Goddess Pearl from Jabun, which, given that you do the other 2 by completing dungeons, it only makes sense that you get your last one by doing the same thing, right? Well, you actually just kind of end up doing a couple things in the overworld and then meeting Jabun near Outset Islands, and he just sort of gives it to you. Huh. Same sort of thing happens after your second visit to the Forsaken Fortress. You need to go to the Earth and Wind Temples, but in order to do that, you need to visit this random island that gives you both the fire and ice arrows, to go to 2 more islands that gets you the iron boots and power bracelets. Like, this part all feels sort of stitched together with some ideas that were originally meant to be a little bit more fleshed out. Then comes the Triforce Hunt, which, yeah, it's time we get into this. This is the worst part of the game. So the concept is cool, you know, assembling 8 pieces of a Triforce just like in Zelda 1, it's a good callback, but the implementation just did not work. So how it plays out is that you're given a chart with the location of all the Triforce charts on the map, so you set sail to a location and perform whatever challenge you need to get that chart. But hold on there, you can't read that chart, so you need to take him to this green fuck and have him decrypt them for you. 398 rupees a pop for a grand total of 3,184 rupees in order to decipher them all. You greedy green piece of shit. Oh, but then you still need to go find the fucking things. So pull up your map, sail over to the islands that line up on your chart, which hopefully you've uncovered most of the map by now, and then fish them out of the water. What a fucking pace breaker. So I think the intention here was that you're supposed to collect these in tandem while you do the Earth and Wind Temples and some other side quests, but let's be real here. There are a lot of people that are just one-track minded, and they just save this section of the game for last, and it's just not a fun thing to do in one setting. This really felt like padding, because why couldn't they just award you with the piece after completing the initial challenge? Why was the rupee quota so high? Like over 3,000 rupees? You could more or less buy every item from every store from every previous Zelda game for that cost, and if you had all the charts and just didn't meet the rupee requirement, that meant you had to grind. Plus, while you're doing all of this, it's not like anything's developing story-wise. You're just bouncing around the map fishing up chunks of sharp cheddar cheese from the ocean. It's really telling how much of this was scaled back and improved in the HD release. Like, it's still kind of a weird pace breaker there, but you can at least get it done in like a third of the time. I don't know. I get what they were going for here, but let's not kid ourselves. This part of the game is just not very good. So with us getting all of that out of the way, we can go back to talking about some of the more positive things about Wind Waker. Let's get into the side content because holy fuck, there's a lot of that. Maybe I just forgot or didn't do a lot of this stuff back in the day, but I did not remember Wind Waker having nearly this much side content available for the player. You've got the pictograph quests, collecting all the heart pieces, filling out your map, getting every bottle, finding all of the great fairies to upgrade your wallet and ammo capacities, watering all the trees the Koroks planted, finding special charts that show the location of the ghost ship as well as Beetle's trading ships, submarines that can be looted, the giant octos Link could kill, hitting this guy 500 times in a row with a sword, fuck this one, completing the Savage Labyrinth, and the dozens of treasure charts that Link can either find or be given as quest rewards. Then there's also the training side quest that lets Link decorate Windfall Isle. Or how about the Nintendo Gallery, where you need to take a picture of every NPC and enemy to create figurines for them. I personally didn't bother with this since this isn't exactly the type of quest that I like doing, but holy fuck, there's a lot here. You also got some fun mini games like soaring through the air on your Deku Leaf, sorting mail, shooting ships out in the ocean, the auction house, and of course,
Splish. Kaboom! Kaboom! Splish.
goated. Yeah, there's no shortage of side stuff to do in this game, which is good because the main game of Wind Waker isn't very long. But yeah, I enjoy the vast majority of what Wind Waker has to offer here. Yeah, some of the islands are pretty boring, and yeah, the Triforce quest kind of sucks, but overall, the majority of the game holds up incredibly well here. Now when it comes to items, we see plenty of new and returning faces this go around. On the returning side of things, we got the iron boots, pictograph box, the bow with the 3 elemental arrow types, the boomerang, hookshot, bombs, power bracelet, all of the bottled items, the mirror shield, and the hammer. Now, even though a lot of those items have already been in previous Zelda games, some of them have been slightly updated. Take for example the boomerang. Now you can lock onto multiple targets and have your boomerang travel across a particular path. Really neat. The hammer is now comically big and can flatten most enemies. The bombs can also be used while inside of the King of Red Lions to fire them like a cannon. That's awesome. The pictograph box can be upgraded to have colored pictures. The arrow types can be swapped out on the fly, with the light arrows being one of the most broken items in any Zelda game since they are a one-shot kill to basically everything except bosses. Now on to the new ones. One of the first new items that Link can get is the telescope, which I never really used after the tutorial on how to use it, but it works exactly like you think a telescope would. I don't know what you want me to say. Then we get the sail, which is a must-have item for actually moving your boat in this game, but more on that and the accompanying Wind Waker in a little bit. The grappling hook is one of the better new items. This will allow Link to swing from certain platforms and even pickpocket items from certain goons. It also doubles as a crane when grabbing things from the ocean floor, which is where you'll probably get the most use out of it. Then there's the Tingle Tuner, which is kind of a complex item since you need a GBA and a link cable in order to use, but this will just let you do a number of different stuff with Tingle like throwing bombs or refill Link's health. Cool concept, never used it, mainly because it was removed from the HD version of the game, so you will probably never use this item either. The magic armor is pretty similar to Nehru's Love in the sense that it gives Link an invulnerable shield, but this time it costs rubies, which is the one thing I want to never waste in this game, so I didn't bother too much with this. If I had to pick an overall favorite item, it has to be the Deku Leaf. So you can use this to blow non-damaging wind gusts at enemies, which can stun them, but you can also use this to glide to further distances. There aren't a lot of areas where you get a ton of room to do this, but being able to ride the winds on this leaf like a hang glider is very fun. Then we have Bait, which is primarily for feeding these fish to fill out your map, and more interestingly, we have this pair that Link is able to put on his head and is able to take control of a seagull to hit certain switches. Sure. You fit both of those in your new bait bag. This go around, you've been given a few different bags to carry your stuff in. One for bait, one for quest items, and one for spoils. Now spoils are drops that enemies will sometimes give upon death that Link can turn into certain vendors to get items. The Choo-Choos will give a potion that corresponds with the color of their jelly. He can give the joy pendants and skull necklaces to certain NPCs for charts. And of course, the champion belts are used to learn the hurricane spin attack. That's kind of it though. Once you have those things, they just kind of take up space in your inventory. And that's pretty much our lineup for items this time around, so overall, it's a good run. Not too many new faces, but I think we got some pretty solid new additions overall. I do think the spoils are a little bit half-baked. I mean, after I got my initial use out of them, I just sold them to Beetle for money, but it was a cool idea nevertheless. The standouts were definitely the Deku Leaf, the grappling hook, and the bombs are how they impacted sailing, which, speaking of, if you're playing the Wind Waker, you're sailing. That's pretty much the main gimmick of this game. So, how does the sailing ultimately show up? Well, it's pretty good. Definitely not perfect. In fact, let's get some of the small things out of the way. So if you're playing the original version and don't have access to the Swift Sail, you are pretty much beholden to the wind. If the wind is blowing east, you are not sailing west. Thankfully, Link gets the ability to change the course of the winds very early on in the game, so you are always able to adjust the direction. It can be a little annoying to have to continually play the song in order to go in a particular direction, but thankfully the wind doesn't just change randomly in the middle of a trip or anything. I understand that pain point, and thankfully it was something that was addressed in the HD version. The other thing that some people don't like about the sailing is the lack of stuff there is to do. Now there aren't really that many enemies present except for a few occasions, and if you don't care about treasure, there's no reason to really stop. You could, in theory, set the wind to a direction, put up your sail, and walk away to get something to drink or go to the bathroom, and when you get back, you'll be at your destination. I actually did this a couple of times during my playthrough. I also get this complaint, but to me, the appeal behind sailing is 100% the vibe. The sights of the islands out in the distance, the adventurous music, the possibility I can find some treasure so I can avoid going into debt later by this lime-flavored version of Tom Nook, that's what I like about the sailing. But people who want something a bit more mechanically engaging probably will get bored with this by the end of the game. You don't really have too many naval combat scenarios outside of the big octos, cannon ships, or these weird pufferfish things, so there's not much to really challenge you in a traditional sense. It's all about the adventure. To me, the highlight here is sailing to a new area, adding it to your map, learning about the island in that sector, and then heading to the next one. Maybe along the way you'll find a tower or a submarine to raid, or a giant whirlpool where a big octo is calling its home, or some sunken treasure you can fish out. These typically amount to either a heart piece or a large stash of rupees, which as long as you keep up with your exploration, makes the endgame rupee quota so much more doable. But that's all there really is to go over when it comes to the sailing, so if I have to say anything, your mileage may vary on this one. If you like kicking back and immersing yourself into the game world a little bit, I think you'll find something to enjoy here. If you're looking for something a little bit more interactive, Wind Waker might disappoint you in this regard. Overall, I liked it. I think it provides like a really fun fantasy to Zelda that we haven't really seen before, so, you know, it's good stuff to me. Now on to our final gimmick, and what better thing to end off with than the thing that's in the title. So what actually is the Wind Waker? Well, it's essentially a baton that Link uses like a maestro that acts as our musical instrument this time around for us to play songs that can alter the world around us. So unlike the ocarina from the N64 games, this one controls a little differently. You essentially start by moving your analog stick in a direction to pick a time signature between 3/4, 4/4, and 6/4. Now, you don't need to know anything about music theory to make this work. Just think of this as how many notes or button presses you're going to be doing. You hold the stick in a direction when the light goes through the middle, and that is the note that will be played. If it sounds a little complex, I promise it's a really easy way to play music in this game. It actually makes it really easy to correct any misinputs if you initially point towards the wrong direction. We've got 6 songs this go around, 2 for each time signature. For 3/4, we have Wind's Requiem and the Song of Passing. Now, the Song of Passing basically just changes the time of day. It's somewhat useful, especially if you need to go to a particular store or if you're tracking down the ghost ship, but I wouldn't say it's as needed as something like the Sun Song from Ocarina of Time. The other is the Wind's Requiem, which is probably the most important song in the game. You use this and change the directions of the wind, making it possible to sail and glide in certain directions. You will be playing this all of the damn time, I promise you. For the 4/4 songs, we have the Ballad of Gales and the Command Melody. The Ballad of Gales can be used as a fast travel to certain islands around the map, and the Command Melody is used in the second half of the game's dungeons to control either Medley or Makar. Finally, with the 6/4 songs, we have the Earth God's Lyric and Wind God's Aria. They are glorified progression checks that you need to either have Medley or Makar play in order to open doors. Next. So yeah, kind of a limited selection of songs, and as we'll see over the next few Zelda games, music started to play less of a focus in a gameplay sense, which to me is a little disappointing. It's kind of something I would like to see come back. I like what's here. I'm a little surprised that we didn't get to see like a rendition of the Song of Storms or anything, given that, it's a sailing game, but, it is what it is. What's here is pretty well done for the most part. Final thing before we get into the closing section of this video, and I briefly wanted to talk about some of the enhancements that the HD version had on the Wii U. So in the graphical department, we got the game boosted from 480 to 1080p, there was a lighting overhaul, many of the HUD elements were redone, and several new graphical effects were added, such as bloom and different shaders in darker areas. The character models and animations, unchanged. If they aren't broke, don't fix them. The music also saw the usage of higher quality instrument samples, and a few tracks even got some added arrangements. Now, the gameplay side of things are where most of the major changes occurred. Most notably is the change to the Triforce hunt. Now, instead of needing to find 8 charts, you only find 3 of them, with the 5 spots you initially found the charts rewarding you a piece of the Triforce instead. This not only cuts down on the rupee count by 1/3, but this also means you only need to fish 3 out of the sea, making this a far quicker experience. The other big change they made was the introduction of the Swift Sail. Now, this is an optional item from the auction house, but hear me out here. It's not optional, buy it. This will automatically turn the wind in the direction that you're facing while you're sailing, meaning you don't need to play the Wind's Requiem anymore while you're on your boat. This speeds up the pace of the game tremendously. Most of the other changes are honestly some pretty minor QOL stuff, such as using the Wii U gamepad for item management, gyroscopic aiming, or using it as your primary screen if that's your thing. You've expanded item usage like being able to turn with a grappling hook, having an icon to land with the deco leaf, taking selfies with the pictograph box. There's a new hero mode that will cause Link to take double damage if you like to experience Wind Waker as if it was a mid-tier difficulty Zelda game. The animations on playing Wind Waker songs and bringing up Sunken Treasure have been sped up. Your default wallet capacity is now much larger so you don't end up wasting rupees. The Tingle Tuner has been replaced with these bottles that you can take pictures and write notes on and then send them out to other players through the Miiverse, which is a really cool idea, but it's kind of pointless now unless you have something like Pretendo in order to have some online functionality, but even then, who knows how much of that you'll actually see on there. You have some more minor additions and some bug fixes that just make this version of the game the de facto way of playing Wind Waker nowadays. That's not to say that there's no merit in playing the GameCube game. I mean, any version of this game that you play is going to be fantastic. Just, I think the improvements really make this one the better of the two, and if we're being honest, it's probably easier and maybe a little bit cheaper to track down a Wii U and a copy of Wind Waker HD than it is to get a GameCube and an OG version of Wind Waker. So, choice is yours. Alright, let's get this video wrapped up. Coming back into this game, I wasn't originally sure where it was going to place in my overall Zelda ranking. It's probably been close to 18 years since I played this last, and before doing this video, I definitely had some opinions going in. but I was happy to see that my positive ones got reinforced and some of my negative ones got changed or questions I had got answered. To this day, this is still one of, if not the best looking Zelda game. The characters are so expressive, the environments are awesome, and the art style still looks phenomenal to this day. The story was a big surprise to me given how likable these characters are and how unique this setting was. And the gameplay, while not my absolute favorite in the series, is another solid 3D Zelda entry with some good dungeons, fun combat, plentiful side activities, and some unique gimmicks that haven't been done the same way outside of this game. Yeah, the sailing isn't the most deep thing in the world. And yeah, the original Triforce quest is pretty fucking lame, but even that can't take away from the unparalleled vibe that this game has. This is one of my favorite Zelda games. It gets a very high recommendation from me, especially the HD version that fixes most of my major complaints. That is definitely the one that I recommend playing the most. Now, Switch port of this and Twilight Princess HD when? But that's all the time I have for you guys today. Thank you for watching. What was your favorite memory of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker? Please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. And hey, if you enjoyed today's video, maybe consider giving a like and subscribing. Thank you guys again. I'll catch you in the next video.